Hello, everyone, and welcome to TBR's Future Friday, TBR 2015 Predictions, a series of thought leadership webinars being held each Friday between January 16th and February 13th, 2015. Each Friday, TBR's research teams will share predictions for 2015 and beyond across the hardware, software, cloud, security, devices, professional services, telecom, and digital markets. Top TBR analysts will address the trends, drivers, and business outcomes they predict will occur throughout the year. The Future Friday webinar series states out the status, changes, and key market directions that will occur. Before we start, there are a few housekeeping items I'd like to cover. First, we will be recording today's sessions and posting it on our YouTube site, TBRI channel. We encourage you to visit our channel and to watch this presentation or any others we've posted. Second, we'd like to hear your opinions and thoughts on the material we're presenting. Please send any questions or comments through the Q&A or chat function. The presenters will address them at the end of the session. Or if you'd like to set up a client inquiry for a more detailed discussion, please reach out directly to our presenters at the end of the webinar to set up that discussion. Third, we'll send out the slides to everyone registered for today's webcast within 24 hours of the conclusion of the webinar. You can also find the slides, as well as our thought leadership pieces, other webinars, and commentaries on SlideShare at http://www.slideshare.net/TBR_market_insight. Next slide, please. My name is Stuart Williams. I'm the Vice President of Research, and I'm moderating today's webinar, which is delivered by Michael Sullivan-Trainer, who is TBR's Executive Telecom Analyst and who leads our practice in telecom and leads our thought leadership in that area extensively. Go to the next slide. In the Future Friday webinar series, TBR research teams provide business analysis on established trends that will continue in 2015, new trends, and long-term predictions for the field. In the next few years, telecom operators will face the realization that they must transform or fade away, becoming either bit pipe utilities or dissolving altogether. Most are awakening to the need to transform and accelerating initiatives to do so. During the next few years, this acceleration will create opportunities for suppliers such as Ericsson, Huawei, Cisco, Amdocs, Hewlett-Packard, IBM, Dell, EMC, Accenture, SAP, Oracle, Alcatel-Lucent, and Nokia networks to deliver new technologies. The telecom industry is in a state of disruption with the traditional business models of wireless and wireline operators under assault through price wars and regulatory obstacles. Strengthening competition from cable operators, cloud, and commerce and over-the-top service providers is limiting growth and crimping margins in video, data, and content-based services. New opportunities to enable the Internet of Things and leverage higher data speeds and greater network capacity are blunted by slow developing business models. TBR presents its 2015 predictions based on recent research that shows this is not an industry resigned to its fate, but one coming to terms with its challenges and embarking on a profound series of transformations from inside out to discover new business models. The three types of trends that we were covering today are trends that will continue into 2015. These are current trends TBR expects will continue or accelerate in the coming year. New trends for 2015. These are maturing, nascent trends from 2014 that TBR believes will expand in the coming year. And long-term trends. These trends are opportunities that TBR believes will begin in 2015, but will not have full effect on the industry for several years. Now that I've set the stage, let me hand the call off to Michael. Michael?
Thank you, Stuart, and welcome to the Future Friday series and the 2015 predictions for telecom. As Stuart mentioned, we are looking at an industry that is in a state of disruption, and we believe the disruption will accelerate. The fractures that are occurring in the industry that have been observed in recent months are going to widen and spread and create further disruption in the industry. And so in this webinar, we're going to look at where we are with the disruption today and as Stuart mentioned, look at some short-term and long-term impacts of how the operators and the industry as a whole is responding to the disruption that they're facing. So as you can see here, we are looking at an overall view of what the key data points are for increased disruption. And then there are 3 areas we're spotlighting. So in this webinar, you'll learn how operators are first streamlining their assets to prepare for and manage the threats to their business model, how they are re-architecting their infrastructure through network functions, virtualization, and software-defined networks, and ultimately how that will replace the legacy infrastructure that's present today. And then what they are doing in terms of investment in long-term opportunity, where we spotlighted a view to appealing to the enterprise, particularly the enterprise move to cloud for what we're characterizing as IT as a service. So we'll be talking about each of these 3 and providing additional depth so that you'll come away from the webinar with an understanding of where operators are today and where we believe they're going in the near future. Next slide, please. So first we'll start with the snapshot in time of 2015 overall, how we see operators situated this year. Next slide. And that is in a state of increased disruption. And what do we mean by disruption? Well, there's been many views of this taken. One that we feel is still germane is to understand the traditional business model, but primarily a network-centric business model where the investments have been driven to create a solid, highly reliable network infrastructure, and then build out of that an enablement layer for content and an access layer for subscribers and data and voice services, all of which are within the operator's control. And that state of a vertically integrated traditional service provider is still a prevalent business model for most of the operators in the market today. And that model is under extreme assault. As we can, any of us in the industry can observe, the payback on the infrastructure investment the operators should be obtaining is just not there. The revenue is beginning to stagnate. Their costs continue to increase, and the lion's share of the new value in the networks is captured by other parties than the operators, over the top players and content providers. So this state of affairs is creating a profound disruption just in the economics of the business model, never mind the way in which the investments are made to operate that model. So we see this traditional model under assault. The network-centric model is a no longer viable one. So then we have the model that we believe operators are already moving towards in part in areas of their operations, and will continue to move in an accelerated fashion toward the model. It has many flavors, but at its heart is focusing on the customer. So we say customer experience enabler is the key business model, where the operator projects themselves in the heart of an ecosystem where the network is an enabling function, and equally important is the partnerships and the additional layers of infrastructure that the operator creates for each customer set in the ecosystem. That's where the value comes from, far less from directly just deploying a network. And in that ecosystem, the value chains that are there to be mined by operators are continued ways to leverage the device and the data stream, particularly around video for subscribers, both business and consumer subscribers. There's the Internet of Things, exemplified by machine-to-machine, and a variety of other home and transport and vertical-specific applications. There's participation in the content revenue stream with content service providers. There's opening the network to over-the-top players and developing revenue share and branding opportunities. We'll spend some time on cloud. Cloud, we believe, is a strong place where the operator can gain value from the enterprise and small business. And then vertical specific, not just network services, but also cloud-related services, and many of these other trends, communication services to verticals. But each of these are a unique ecosystem that require far more than a monolithic business model. They require a distributed business model where each customer type is catered to through the technology the service provider can bring to bear. And the last point I'd make on this slide is that traditional models are under assault and transformation is slow. So we do say that transformation is accelerating, more things are happening more quickly for the operator than ever before, but because of the sunk costs in the present infrastructure and business model, it's very hard to turn the ship towards the change. Nevertheless, there are many in the industry who are driving these changes. Next slide, please. One of the attributes of the assault is a growing competition. Here we are highlighting, and we do it at several points in the presentation, the North American and particularly the U.S. market, because the U.S. market is among the more advanced in stages of where disruption will occur. Why is that so? Because the major advance in the traditional model of rolling out the next layer of infrastructure, namely LTE, and taking broadband about as far as it can go, is running close to running its course in this market. Therefore, the new revenue streams are even more urgently required than in some other markets that have yet to get the full mileage out of additional infrastructure investments. This slide, we take a snapshot of AT&T and particularly hone in on AT&T's margins, where we will see some struggle in margin. We certainly see going through the quarters that we're seeing a decline in gross margin and a flattish operating margin. No drama here. Maintaining those margins is really what is the challenge for AT&T. And as we move past the days when there's accretive revenue from LTE additions, these margins will be more difficult to maintain because the competition is challenging in the other business areas, as well as we'll highlight in a minute, within our own within the business area of traditional wireless infrastructure with the pending and current price wars. A typical competitor may be a Comcast, which is equally struggling to find new revenue growth and moving rapidly, particularly through the video and broadband spaces towards the market that's held by the wireless operators and the fixed operators, as well as alternative players like Google. Google has a lot of intentions to find ways to directly attack the operator marketplace with an ability to live with lower margins. They already do live with lower margins in the operating margin, and it's very much a growth-driven company that is offering a lot of different services now, everything from direct fiber to alternative wireless services, different ways to mine the ecosystem, in addition to the over-the-top revenue they already collect to continue to threaten the service provider business model. And this competition is just going to get more intense as we go forward in this 2015. Next slide, please. So what are the operators doing about that? Well, besides trying to find ways to compete with or partner with the alternative providers, they are, of course, creating new revenue streams. One of the more prevalent, particularly coming out of the Consumer Electronics Show just last week, is the Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things is a very popular, very broad opportunity for operators, yet the amount of revenue that it today is gaining for them and the future amount of revenue they will collect is in serious doubt as to how it can compensate for the volume that the traditional model provided. And in fact, if you remember our earlier slide, we see the Internet of Things as not the holy grail. We see it as one set of ecosystems and value capture that the operator needs to look at, but certainly not the one. This slide highlights one of the ways in which AT&T and Verizon have been to interpret their position in Internet of Things, and that is through including connected devices in the total view of their market. And in the numbers, we have the 18.5 million, the 18 million mark relative to total subscriber base and total necessary revenue stream is a small number, particularly when you consider many of these connected devices are providing far less than what you would provide for ARPU for an individual user, sometimes dollars or below dollar values on the ARPU for a typical IoT kind of application. So as a substitute for traditional revenue, it's lagging. As a new growth area, it is interesting and of value to the operator, and so we see that going on. So the points here being made are that the path to new growth is slow, which increases the internal need for change in the model for ways to disrupt the way in which service is delivered, lower the cost of delivery of service, as well as to reach out to new kinds of businesses to develop additional revenue streams. And then we have, in this particular market, a parity where there is, in many markets, there is 1 or 2 or 3 chief operators who are all fighting with each other for the same revenue stake, never mind the alternative competitors. Next slide, please. So there we have the state of things. We have a disrupted business model, we have new competitors, and we have limited revenue growth from new initiatives. So clearly the operator cannot stand pat and just expect to add accretive revenue to its capabilities. Additional strong measures must be taken, and operators in 2015 will accelerate the measures they've begun to take. One of the most important ones is streamlining assets. So next slide, please. By streamlining assets, we mean lowering costs so that they can fend off the challenges to margin, from slower revenue growth. And in this particular slide, we're highlighting the challenges to margin that come from the internal competition in this particular market, where you see a large-scale deployment of LTE across the marketplace, but very quickly, rather than capturing too much of a premium on LTE services, the operators are embroiled in a price war because there's a view that there is a saturated subscriber base. It's more than a view. A reality, there's a saturated subscriber base, and in order to win this war, one must capture a maximum number of subscribers from other operators, engendering a price war, which is flattening revenue and hampering margins. As you can see here, margin growth is fairly flat and at a relatively low level for even the Verizons and AT&Ts, let alone the smaller players that are going to be even more and continue to struggle and may have to do more drastic measures. Among those drastic measures may be some of what we've already seen, such as the Metro PCS T-Mobile merger, more in-market mergers. And the large players are looking at out-of-market acquisitions, such as AT&T's acquisition of IUCell in Mexico. The churn in the model in the internal market is going to suggest a greater opportunity for mergers and acquisitions and a greater appetite for external investment to feed revenue volume for these operators. And this kind of situation exists in many other markets as well, where we see the need to grow through acquisition or merger, either internally or externally, because the fundamentals of the traditional model are just not providing the value that they used to. Next slide, please. So that's going to continue and accelerate in 2015. Beyond what's happening with the operators as a whole, it's within each operator pressure to spend less. And the first spend less is CapEx. And we're already working with a knowledge that CapEx declined, again, highlighting the U.S. as an example, by a little more than 7% in the third quarter. And we're seeing statements made by AT&T of a reduction in CapEx of $3 billion, 2014 to 2018. We're seeing a flat CapEx for Verizon. This is partially because the bulk of the LTE build-out has occurred, but it's also because there's a need to lower overall spending in order to, again, capture more, maintain that margin and produce the dividends that the shareholders are expecting. So overall, a lower CapEx. And further to that, from the suppliers who are among our audience, it's looking to understand the CapEx itself will be redeployed within operators. The redeployment of CapEx, besides a lower ceiling on CapEx, will be the two major features of 2015, and understanding how that CapEx is being redeployed to which areas of the business, which areas of infrastructure, which external business models is a key to success for suppliers in 2015. Next slide, please. In addition to CapEx, of course, OpEx is a major concern to the operators. And OpEx, we see a continued growth in OpEx. It's costing more to operate the network with the amount of growth in services that users are requiring and the quality of service. Things are not getting less expensive for the operators. So, and we can see here, again, using the U.S. as an example, a network attributed OpEx as a percent of revenue is even more of a significant chunk of the spend for operators than CapEx is, and therefore is receiving a lot of attention. It's a significant obstacle to margin. Without reducing OpEx, it's difficult to move the margin upward or even maintain it when it's under threat. One of the major areas we expect there to be movement on in 2015 is how to redirect and retrain employees to partake in the transformation that's necessary. Legacy network infrastructure investments are going to decline. Legacy competency is therefore going to be less valued in the operator, and the employees are going to need to be redeployed and retrained. And we think an opportunity to help with that opportunity for the suppliers is there with the learning services to address this challenge. And it also can constitute an opportunity for managed services or out-tasking services where the transition in employees is going to take some time, and there'll be a time to market question to deploy new services, new capabilities. Again, trying to map this kind of change toward that customer enabler business model where all these expertise are required in different kinds of vertical services, content services, video services with a more agile, flexible infrastructure, can begin to see where some of the operators' retraining needs to happen, where they might be interested in some alliances to get that done. So all of that's going to come with an underlying expectation that lower OpEx will be the result to fight the margin battle the operator needs to fight. So we really are looking at 2015 where streamlining is the prime directive for operators, but doing so creatively in order to be prepared for and reach out to new capabilities is going to be the way in which that streamlining is done. Next slide, please.
Yeah, Michael, so this is Stuart. Just want to jump in here and say that these were continuing trends that were present in the market already and that they're going to be rolling through 2015. The next set of slides are really the net new trends that are going to really take hold in the coming year. Right, Mike?
That's correct. Thank you, Stuart. So the state of the market then is, just to summarize briefly, we have seen a market that is facing severe disruption and change to existing business models. We have seen that evidence through the challenges on the competitive front and on the ability to achieve new revenue. And then we have seen the initial step operators have taken that is going to continue to be advanced, and that's streamlining both CapEx and OpEx. So given all that, what is new in 2015 that's going to have a profound impact on the business going forward? And of course, any of us following the industry understand that network functions virtualization and software-defined networking has virtually overtaken the industry by storm in the last year as a key trend, and we believe that trend is going to continue to be the focal point for operators who are faced with streamlining and revenue growth going into 2015. Next slide, please. Yet, the NFV and SDN are also not a silver bullet. They are an evolution. We are seeing an evolution of the service provider architecture to a virtual software-mediated infrastructure that essentially has never been implemented before, which is another reason why we label this a disruptive rather than a incremental change. It's not just another layer of technology in the same vein as the traditional infrastructure. So we are looking at moving more and more network function into a virtual architecture where instead of hardware-dependent silos, we have software-mediated, orchestrated functions that can be worked towards different workloads that are delivered by the service provider, whether in the traditional servicing of wireless voice and data services or fixed voice and data services. But more importantly, it allows for differentiated kinds of data services and is a very important piece of agility to cater to the new customer enabling environments for the different kinds of revenue models. Now, the perspective from TBR is that the conversation about NFV and SDN has been somewhat neglected as to how they can be applied to a customer enabler business model. We believe that conversation is going to be a prime one going into 2015 and 2016 as NFV and SDN are deployed. As we know, the preoccupation of 2014 and going into 2015 for NFV and SDN is what is it? Is it feasible? How is it made feasible? And from an operator's perspective initially, how is it saving me money? How is it first tying to that prime directive of streamline? How do I become more streamlined and more agile by virtue of NFV and SDN? This value from NFV and SDN is sufficiently strong that even without knowing how accretive it might be to revenue, we have major operators already staking the ground for strategic shifts to NFV and SDN, such as this quote here, where we have the Vice President of Architecture and Design of AT&T, who's following the directives of John Donovan and others at AT&T to carry out a transformation of infrastructure. So here we have 75% of a target network under Domain 2.0. Now, those words were chosen very carefully. There is not, back to the evolution theme, it is not a wholesale flip the switch, drive NFV SDN. It is target an area of the network where the operator feels they will gain value, streamline value, agility value, ultimately revenue, opportunity value, and implement NFV SDN there. So the business cases for NFV SDN are going to be a ruling factor in 2015 and into 2016. AT&T has drawn a box around the Domain 2.0 architecture, naming which areas of the network it wants to implement NFV and SDN, begun to name key suppliers to conduct the transformation, and now has a target date of 75% by 2020. The other key word that's on this slide coming from AT&T is virtualize and control. So a lot of investment initially in orchestration and control of the network, whether it be virtual or legacy, in a more flexible, automated fashion is the emphasis coming from NFV SDN. It's not so much just virtualizing functions or just creating a software-defined routing infrastructure or transport infrastructure. It really is, can we consolidate and maximize how we bring flexibility and automation to the control functions across the service chain that's going to be created by NFV and SDN. And so those are ways in which to look at this that are going to be very important. So the control piece, the business model piece, and the acceleration of all this on the back of the standards initiatives that have been underway for some time now are all going to take place with NFV and SDN in 2015 and beyond. Next slide. How is that playing out in sort of where's the money? Well, as we talked about earlier, here we show a initial forecast we've conducted for the CapEx spend towards NFV. When we see a very small incremental growth in the present year and going forward, and it constitutes our growth within a flat overall CapEx environment. This is a worldwide view, not just a North American view. There are debates going on, we're having it ourselves, about whether this will accelerate and more dollars will be seen up front, and maybe so, but it's going to be a relatively lower expectation of CapEx investment for the near term. So neither can a supplier say, okay, I'm going to direct all my energies just on NFV-SDN and abandon my legacy portfolio investment. So this constitutes a challenge for suppliers. So as with operators, suppliers have to play a mitigation game in the early years of NFV-SDN to be able to have the elements of its portfolio that can be derived from traditional sources as well as new sources. All that said, probably neither of them have enough traction to really bring a huge amount of revenue growth to either suppliers or operators, which is why we have, parallel to the NFV-SDN developments, new ways to derive revenue from the customer enabling model that we're talking about, whether it be in IoT or cloud or vertical or content, all of these other ways, as well as ways to shift the way in which the operator or the supplier is structured through mergers, acquisitions, partnerships. So there's a full plate of things going on where NFV-SDN is one of the moving parts, but not by any means the only one. And here we also make the point that in addition to redeploying the CapEx, the first and foremost interest is on Nano, the automation and orchestration of the network infrastructure in a more flexible, agile manner is really the point for this spend. Next slide, please. Just taking that point one step further, we have been tracking operator activity in NFV and SDN, and will continue to do so going into 2015, and expect there'll to be much more activity. Combination of understanding how important the NFV-SDN is to the operator and how quickly they are adopting the technology in a first trial sense, but then we're going to see production applications, production deployments in 2015, where we'll be able to track more concrete return on investment, more concrete business case, and we're going to see some operators on this map. Particularly, we think the Telefónicas, AT&Ts, Deutsche Telecoms create some models for NFV and SDN that the rest of the market is going to follow. And so what you see here is mostly tier ones and distributed globally. And the rest of the operators in the low corner, the tier 2s and 3s, the rest of the tier 1s, you don't see. Once those breakthroughs in NFV-SDN deployments are occur and are documented by the lead service providers, they will be following suit very rapidly. And we believe this is going to be a cause for revenue growth going into 2016, 2018. It's why we have a high growth expectation for NFV and SDN. And also why, from a supplier standpoint, it's important to understand both cases. There's a case of being present for the tier 1 breakthroughs and rollouts, but being ready to offer that similar capabilities to the tier 2s and 3s who are going to be hungry for it at their level, in their market, in their space, to achieve the same streamlining and agility and ideally revenue capture opportunity. The other factor going on with NFV and SDN is, of course, the significant amount of activity in open source and standards and pre-standard organizations. This is this third factor. So we have the operators and their investments, we have the suppliers and their portfolios, and then we have a open source community and standards groups that are essentially also helping to shape the landscape. And so deep participation in those is vital, particularly this year, as they are going to continue to have a leadership position with any nascent technology. Those groups tend to have more to say in the start than they do later on when things go into production, and it's the production value that guides. So overall, a lot of activity in NFV-SDN, and in addition to the streamlining play, the NFV-SDN play is probably the second most significant thing the operators are doing in 2015. Next slide, please. So those were trends that began and will continue in 2015. We're now going to look at opportunities that are a bit further out, long-term opportunities. They have their seeds planted now, but as far as a value for the operator on a large scale, when the operator's business model has begun to be turned really towards these opportunities, we're going to be looking at that now, and we've focused in here on a parallel change that's going on in the marketplace in the IT world, in the enterprise IT world in particular, which of course is the overarching understanding of cloud and virtualization across the enterprise, where the question is often asked, how do telecom service providers leverage that? How do they play in that? So we'll endeavor to talk a little bit about that in this next set of slides. Next slide, please. What we are seeing is a gradual movement of the enterprise towards a greater number of workloads towards cloud services in a variety of ways, in a private cloud, public cloud ways for individual workloads, or towards hybrid clouds. And as they move towards hybrid clouds, there's different ways in which to disaggregate or componentize the workloads and drive different efficiencies and values for the enterprise. Cloud service providers have essentially led the way there, but it's almost entirely been done without a real acknowledgement of the importance of the network to accomplish the cloud services. Clearly, cloud does not work without the network, and network agreements that are based on traditional models are vulnerable to outages and breakdowns in the infrastructure if the network's provisioned separately or not at all considered from the cloud installation, the cloud service. So carriers have begun to pay attention to this opportunity. They've created something that we're documenting as Carrier Cloud. Carrier Cloud is built on top of the enterprise services for the most part, although it also has consumer services, cloud services for consumers, the compute, storage, security, IaaS kind of flavors, as well as software as a service components, and more recently, platform as a service offers from service providers. Here we show our documenting of the revenue from that, which, again, understanding the volume challenges of the service providers, particularly global scale service providers, is a relatively small amount of revenue. Yet, it, as we document here, is growing at 30% per year. There is nowhere else in the service provider market where you can really point to that kind of double-digit revenue growth that you can expect to be sustained. Why is this? Because the revenue capture for cloud services by telco service providers is fairly new and fairly rapidly occurring. All these global providers have the fortune of having a global data center footprint on which to build and foster cloud services. They have, most of them, enterprise business functions that are able to leverage the selling process. Some of them have robust professional services around this as well to integrate and customize cloud offers. So this is where we see a tremendous amount of value and investment and growth for service providers that's going to receive increased attention in the short term and become a very robust arm, maybe even a major redefinition of operators going into the future, which is why we put it into the long-term opportunity section. And here you can see some of the leaders, NTT, by virtue of acquiring its way into a bigger data center footprint and being strategically focused on Carrier Cloud. Deutsche Telekom, from its large base in Europe and continuing to grow out from there as well as internationally. China Telecom recently mining the domestic market for cloud services and expanding. AT&T and Verizon always well-positioned internationally with their data center footprint and have been moving in lockstep with each other to expand their cloud services. Then you have BT, Korea Telecom, Orange, similarly globally deployed and leveraging domestic markets. Interesting story in CenturyLink. CenturyLink might be the cloud poster child for what a fixed operator ought to do to move the business model towards cloud in a domestic market. It helped that they acquired a hosting company that was also positioned internationally, so that broadened their assets considerably. And then you have some of the national market leaders turning their attention to cloud, like Bharti in India, Telefonica across its portfolio in Europe and Latin America, and then Vodafone with its acquisition of Cable and Wireless. So in the last year or two, this opportunity is being taken very seriously, and as we continue to examine it, the sheer growth of it and volume of it aligned to the trajectory of enterprise IT towards cloud services is just going to continue to make this a long-term opportunity for the service providers. Next slide, please. So where is this headed? We believe that over time, more and more of the workloads of enterprises are going to be moved to cloud services to create a concept of IT as a service, so not just individual workloads or individual cloud services, but large portions of the IT function offered as a service. That becomes the new IT in the foreseeable future. Companies will have the opportunity to gain the economies for most of their infrastructure by cloud services, the flexibility and the opportunity to interact and make changes and all the scaling and other values that cloud provides. However, a key attribute of that is going to be whether or not the network it plays a role in this. So we have here shown a cloud hierarchy. And you could think of the commodity clouds, the clouds that have no value in terms of whether the network is engaged or not, as a traditional IT cloud that offers good enough service. It's a public cloud offer. And from an economic standpoint, as many of the cloud service providers are finding, it's a race to zero as far as the cost. It's a commodities game. And so the lack of visibility into the underlying assets creates an insecurity for any enterprise that wants to move a serious workload to the cloud to achieve the benefits of those economics, but at the same security and reliability that they would from an internal on-premise infrastructure. So then we have the development of mission-critical clouds. Mission-critical clouds begin to take into account the provision of visibility, security, and governance that enterprises need to be able to be sure their enterprise application is carried out with the requirements, the SLAs they need. And it requires a view towards interclouds or hybrid clouds. It requires a view towards, well, where does the reliability of the cloud infrastructure get addressed? And of course, that reliability is addressed both within the data center and within the network. So the network becomes a very important part of delivering mission-critical cloud. Agreements around the network, creating virtual private networks. As we say here, mission-critical cloud services that are bonded with the network, which means they operate in parallel with a network agreement for delivering the SLAs. That's the mission-critical cloud, and that's already an opportunity that's begun to be addressed, things like AT&T NetBond, things like Verizon and HP Helion. We have what's been come in the latter part of this year called interclouds that are facilitating mission-critical cloud services with a network bonded to them, or an SLA for the network bonded to them, as a phenomenon we can see is going to continue to grow and allow an unlocking of those enterprise applications. Yet the story is not complete. What we believe to be true carrier clouds are yet to come. And these are cloud installations where the orchestration and automation of the infrastructure spans both the data center, the cloud infrastructure, if you will, and the network. So the provisioning time is reduced, the points of failure are reduced, the ability to have a very agile and flexible delivery of not just the cloud service, but the network scale and network quality of service is manifest. And these kinds of carrier clouds will cater to the next layer of applications that enterprises have that require transactional performance capabilities, that require an integration of a wide variety of access points, as we highlight here, different kinds of IoT, Internet of Things business models, different kinds of business networks, different kinds of mix and match components of applications, where you can't wait for the provisioning time even of a bonded network infrastructure with the cloud service. It needs to be seamless. So the seamlessness, guaranteed reliability, quality of service, and security are things that the carrier cloud will deliver and will be something service providers are in the really the only position to deliver it. Now that said, deliver it how? Service providers, for the most part, telecom service providers, work with and partner closely with cloud providers, or at least infrastructure providers for the cloud infrastructure. So you see Verizon, HP, you see AT&T, IBM, a combination of what they're doing internally as a telco service provider and through partnerships through intercloud infrastructure. So certainly Cisco's intercloud is another good example. And we believe this partnership between probably not that many very large IT service providers along with the telco service providers will be the way in which the carrier clouds come into being. We believe this is the future that will unlock a greater amount of IT as a service and really change the landscape. It changes the nature of the business for both the IT partner and for the telco service provider. And telco service providers have to become aware of this and move cautiously into it so they retain as much value as possible, so it becomes a joint offer to the enterprise where they're gaining the volume of revenue and the margin value that they need to make the infrastructure investment feasible. No matter how it comes to be, it will represent a significantly higher growth opportunity than many of the instances of where service providers are putting their money today. So we believe, stay tuned for IT as a service to continue to expand and grow as a new way in which telco service providers are going to be able to make gain value out of their networks. The next slide, please. So we want to conclude with a look at the role, then, I referenced it earlier, of the operator. In the short term, the operator is in the process of determining which business model is going to work for them to deliver this IT as a service capability. The good news is there are varying delivery models that an agile, flexible network, harking back to our NFV-SDN view, as well as our carrier cloud view, that the operator can take to use different delivery models to gain different values. So whether it be focusing on the vertical, so becoming a specialist in the kinds of mission-critical or carrier cloud applications of relevance to healthcare or finance or retail, or hosting individual applications across a more horizontal workloads, such as for small business, or partnering closely with a custom kind of cloud capability, such as you might get if you work with an IBM or an HP, or even being a broker across different suppliers, different cloud providers, or different application providers for different flavors and quality of service of clouds. All these things, it really is a broad spectrum of what an operator can do to be the network delivery underneath an IT as a service offer. And here we're showing from our overall cloud coverage. This is not just relevant to the operator cloud, but it's basically all the flavors of cloud participation we see in the marketplace a very robust overall market for spend on cloud, anywhere from the public cloud, which we've talked about, to manage private clouds, the cloud professional services, which we highlighted, and to the components necessary to deliver cloud services. So there's a major marketplace opportunity here that the service provider maps very nicely into according to that hierarchy that we just showed, provided they deliver a flexible model that lets them maximize the value of the network. Next slide, please. So with that, I would like to conclude the presentation and talk again about the key 3 things that operators will be focusing on continuing in 2015 and looking for in the future. We believe the #1 prime directive, streamlined assets, maximize the cost structure in order to meet the challenges of increased competition and the first fissures of disruption that are occurring in the market. Focus on implementing a software-mediated infrastructure to create a new sense of agility and efficiency in the network to open up a new set of revenue opportunities. And then last but not least, the long-term opportunity of being able to be an enabler of a network of enterprise clouds, which is essentially what IT as a service becomes. It's a variety of cloud service delivery models across different kinds of IT workloads with different kinds of partnerships to maximize revenue from the network and maximize revenue from IT and cloud services. So with that, I'd like to turn the presentation back over to Stuart for questions.
Thank you, Michael. We had a couple of questions that came in during the course of the presentation. I'm just going to start with the one that just came in at the end there, since it's fresh in everybody's minds. A question on any thoughts on how telcos will be able to make the necessary infrastructure investments to be able to provision the carrier cloud as described here when they're under pressure to reduce CapEx. Comment after that says, this appears to be a build it and they will come market.
So the feedback, the question, so it's about the carrier making the cloud infrastructure investment. Opportunity #1 or option #1 is, as I referenced earlier, redeploying CapEx. So yes, CapEx is being reduced, but redeploying it from the network investment to the cloud investment. Whether that's done by spinning off the cloud business and having it be its own entity, or other ways to protect it from some of the pressures of the business model, it's the decision by an operator to say, I'm going to be in the cloud business. I think CenturyLink is a good example. CenturyLink is both maintaining its infrastructure and building out a cloud business, and it's doing it with a reduced CapEx picture. So that's one. Option 2, of course, is to not do that. Option 2 is to partner, is to rely on the partner's infrastructure, a partner who has an infrastructure for cloud but perhaps does not have a network. And so that co-opetition or cooperation, those alliances, I expect to see flavors of both as we go into this period, but believe that service providers can, in fact, find a way to reposition CapEx to participate strongly in the market.
Good. Well, we have another. Thank you, Michael. We had another question here. It says, what is the predicted value to the end customer of the implementation of NFV and SDN?
That is a great question. The value from my standpoint is a flexibility in quality of service that is not there today. Faster provisioning, perhaps an integration of additional features into an application or a service, and in some cases maybe a lower cost of the service. So of course, given the margin pressures and revenue pressures on the operator, the lower cost provision is going to be the last thing they want to do. They're going to try and upgrade the value of and the speed of provisioning that service to the end customer. And so that, in that sense, the customer can experience value out of NFV and SDN. That said, much exploration has to be done to really come to terms with what that is. And will it be like this application brought to you by NFV? I don't think we're ever going to reach it. It's going to be more like the flexibility and agility of the service provider to offer you a service that you want. It'll be transparent whether it was delivered as an NFV or SDN capability. Okay.
So our last question, as we come in to wrap this up, is coming back to our continuing predictions. Are CapEx reductions believed to be in the OSS or BSS areas or both?
So CapEx reduction is primarily in legacy technologies and in no longer needing to build out a lot of coverage of network. So I would say it's in equipment first, OSS and BSS second. We do see tremendous transformation investment going, significant transformation investment going towards particularly the BSS to prepare for NFV SDN. So we've got counter trends going on in OSS, BSS, where we're going to see an investment made there for the sake of the transformation for the agile network that will mitigate some of the reductions that will be obtained because of the legacy retirements that are going on.
Well, great. Thank you for that, Michael. Appreciate you putting together the predictions for the year. And thank everybody who's been on this webinar for participating and for your questions. Remember, you can follow Michael and TBR on Twitter at the handles listed here. And please check out our pages on SlideShare and YouTube as well. Before you sign off, we'd like to ask you to take a brief survey about today's webinar. As we research performance of the technology companies, we're also studying how we're helping our clients, and your feedback would be greatly appreciated. We'll leave the chat function open for another 5 minutes to give folks who are on the webinar a chance to ask any last-minute questions. And again, thank you, and we hope to see you all again soon.